Uh, Hi everybody, my name is Pascal Aurien. I am one of the co-founder of the Ethertrust company, and I am also a researcher at Telecom Paris in Saclay, which is one école in France, close to Paris. And the subject of this talk is crypto terminals for trusted Ethereum transaction. So 2 words about Ethertrust. Ethers mean the medium propagation for light that was supposed to exist, and it was demonstrated by the beginning of the 20th century that this medium didn't exist, and so it was a starting point for the relativity theory. And so the name Ethertrust means trust for computing. So Ethertrust's vision is to improve privacy and security of the internet, including blockchain and Internet of Things, to say IoT, by enabling through standards compliance softwares greater and more creative use of secure elements that supports crypto processors. You all know because secure elements, you have secure element in your bank card with chip and pin. You have secure element as a SIM module. You have secure element in e-passport. And so the Ethertrust DNA is to design secure and trusted software architectures based on secure elements. About trust for Ethereum, we believe that secure key storage and signatures trust are key features for the development of Ethereum services. You all know that when you want to create an account in Ethereum, you generate a 32-byte random number, which is your private key. From that, you compute a public key, and from the public key, you compute your address, your Ethereum address. So each time you want to have a service over Ethereum, you generate a transaction, either for Ether crypto money transfer or for smart contract remote invocation, remote call. And so transactions are signed by the private key. And that's why the secure key storage and the trust of the signatures are a key issue for the development of Ethereum services. Therefore, we design and publish the technology and algorithm in order to get integrity insurance, both for software and hardware involved in a transaction signatures process. So we design what we call crypto terminals. First of all, the crypto terminal is not a wallet. Crypto terminals is used by wallet. And the crypto terminal design principles are similar to payment terminal architectures. Every day when you perform a payment, mainly in Europe, but also in Canada, and now in the US too, you use a chip and pin technology. That's to say you use a smart card. Inside the smart cards, you have key. But this key, in fact, you don't know the value of this key. This key has the property of the card issuer, and you use dual authentication procedures. That's to say you use PIN code in order to authenticate your transaction. And this banking card is not, you cannot use this bank card from your PC or through an NFC from your mobiles. The merchant, use terminals, and this terminal is not the property of the merchant. It is in fact the property of a card issuer, and it's a trusted device which has been designed according to standards enforced issued by fintech. And so it's very different in blockchain. In blockchain, the key are the property of the owner, of the account owner. and the crypto terminals, on the terminals, there's no standards, and so it's very different. So the idea is to use removable smart cards that realize secure key storage and signatures computing, and similar to the banking architectures, to the bank card payment architectures. This smart card is used from a crypto terminal, which relies smart cards management, which acts as a firewall between the smart cards that is called, and connected device that's in the blockchain, which are with a TCP/IP stack, so which are of the device. And also the crypto management is in charge of the communication. It delivers the communication services. So we support two kind of communication. Serial USB. There's no battery in the crypto terminal. The crypto terminal it's a green device, so it is fed by the USB bus. And in Android phone, you have, for example, OTG, which means USB for embedded device, but OTG is not supported by iPhones. That's why we decided to support also Bluetooth in order to have communication with Apple devices. So we use software and hardware open architectures. Everybody knows what means open software. It means that you have the source, the code source, but you need also the code for the driver, for the input, for the I/O system, and so on. And that's what we choose an open hardware platform, and that's to say Arduino. The advantage is that everything is open, the hardware, and also the software. So it means you can build by hand crypto terminals. There you see this Arduino board with an Atmega 2560 processors and the CH340 USB chip. There is what is called a serial programming port, which is used to flash the processors, the main processor. You see there the smart card, the socket. It's basically just 5 wire connectors with the secure elements. There is a Bluetooth low energy module with its CC2541. We choose this module because it can be flashed, and so we believe this is an important security feature, so we can erase fully erase this content and refresh it. There you see the touch screen, which is whose resolution is 320 4080, and there you have the smart cards, and more precisely it's a Java card. So it means Java cards are in conformance with the Java card standard, and you can first you can program Java card in Java, and you may also buy a device from several manufacturers. And here you see the what is called USB SP programmer. It means it's a flashing DED device. It's a programming token, and it's also hardware. It's open hardware, and it's also open software. And we use this device to flash the main memory, the main processors. And there you see this open device, which is built by hand. You see the screen, the socket, which is plugged over the board, and the socket, a Java card, and there the Bluetooth low energy module with some wires. And so we design Ethertrust. This is open, but this is not very usable. So from a practical point of view, we design board. You see there a board. You see the main processor, the USB chip, the connector for the screen, the smart card socket, the smart cards. And on the bottom side, you see the Bluetooth low energy module based on the CC2540 chip. Then we design, we do 3D printing, and we put the board in a case, the screen in a cover, and we put some glue between the case and the cover, and then you have your crypto terminal at work. From a software point of view, we choose to deal with bare metal software models. That's to say that we can erase quite all the software of the system, and it's an important part of the model. So we have no bootloader accepted in the SPI programmer. So you have the main processor that can be flashed with that is flashed thanks to the SPI programmer with the crypto terminals firmware. And then from this firmware, it's possible to flash the Bluetooth Low Energy firmware. And in the secure element, you cannot flash the Java card operating system, but you have the choice of the manufacturer. But you can flash what we call the cryptocurrency firmware for Java card. And in the SPI programmer, we have a 2 kilobyte bootloader, which is used to download software. One of this software being the USB ISP firmware, which is used by Windows. And there you see a crypto terminal in hand. It has, as you see, a credit card size, approximately 15 millimeter height. And this is the internal structures of the firmware of the main processor. So there is you have a set of library dedicated to the ISO 7816 smart cards interface. To the touchstream, we have a CryptoLib performing extra operation, dealing, for example, regarding Ethereum with the recovery operation, which is some crypto particularity of Ethereum. We have a dedicated Ethereum lib, which is used to build Ethereum transaction. You have a library for the screen. You have a library for which is the loader for the Bluetooth module. So you see it, the Java card there, and the USB SB flasher with an USB interface, and whose firmware can be also flashed. And there you see the internal. You see the two working mode. First, you have a call mode. It's possible to send command by the keyboard, by the keypad, to the firmware, for example, in order to create key, to name key, to perform cold signatures, to check the smart card's authenticity, to check the authenticity of the firmware. And it's also possible to send command from the communication interface, such as USB or Bluetooth. And the central security entity, this command parser, which act as a firewall between the cold words, that to say the crypto terminal and the Java card, and the hot word, that to say the PC or the mobile. Okay, so there's a set of commands. Over the communication bus, you can send a set of commands to the crypto terminal, for example, to trigger the pin, the starting of the Java card, which require a pin code. You have some command in order to generate key, to compute key, and so on. You can edit an Ethereum address. You can perform signatures. You can generate transaction. You can duplicate a card. And you can also check the firmware integrity or check the smart card's integrity. And you have also, as a smart cards level, a set of ISO 7816 commands in order to manipulate a pin, to modify the pin, but also to generate key, to generate signatures, and to read the certificates associated to this card. We'll give more detail on that in a few moments. So there is an application that you can find on Google Play, and this is a Bluetooth application. The goal of this application is to sign, to generate and to push on Ethereum blockchain the signatures of every file that is stored on your mobile. And to do that, this application works with a crypto terminal over Bluetooth. So here you see that the Bluetooth starting is down from the keypad. It cannot be done by the mobile, by this key. Then you see that an example of the user command, which is sent to the crypto terminals, and that asks to the user to enter this pin on the keypad of the crypto terminal. And then you see the set trans command, which sends a set of parameters to the crypto terminal. And you see there the data of the transactions that are displayed, the recipient address and the amount. And there you see the screen that asks to the user to confirm the signature of this transaction with its Java card. Okay. So to design the cyber security of this crypto terminal, we make for several months and years a survey about cyber attack on a wallet for blockchain. And for each attack, we try to extract the principle at the attack of this attack. That say why some attack works on wallet, why is it possible to recover key, and so on. And so for them, we identify 6 main threats. The threats number 1 is the lack of tamper-resistant storage and side channel attack, able to recover cryptographic key at runtime. That's why we are using Java card. Threat number 2 is supply chain attack, targeting malware injection or firmware malicious modification. Contrary to bank terminals, you buy this low-cost crypto terminal on the classical supply chain over internet. So it's very easy to modify the firmware and to insert malware. So it's happened not only for blockchain wallet, but it happened in fact for many softwares today, and the supply chain attack are something very important. Threat number 3 is software integrity is not checked. Typically, a bootloader checks embedded firmware integrity, but if the bootloader is corrupted, usually with some crypto, it's possible then to download the malware because the bootloader is corrupted. It's something quite similar to rootkits. It means you cannot detect that a bootloader is not able in classical system to detect that it is corrupted. Threat number 4 is a PIN code or password hack. If you type your PIN code or your password or some information on a classical device like PC or mobile, then you may have a keylogger that captures text entered from the keyboard. Threat number 5 is misuse of the device from laptop or mobile because you have a Trojan horse and or worm, and so some malware is able to use and to silently use your device. And the threat number 6 is cloning of GUINAM devices. Clone with equivalent features include hidden function, targeting cryptographic key recovering. And now I'm going to present a set of the countermeasures that are that has been inserted in the crypto terminal in order to defeat this threat. So there are 8 countermeasures. The first one is the secure element. It's the Java card. Java card has a high security level, typically EAL 5+ to EAL 6+. Even the fact that the maximum security level is EAL 5.7 in a common criteria. So it means you have a high level of security in Java card, and this is inherent from the secure element world. And these devices are optimized in order to prevent side channel attacks. There are several manufacturers because we are using Java card. So it means you may have, due to national policy or company policy and whatever you want, you can select one specific manufacturers of the Java cards you want to use. The firmware is written in Java card language, so the firmware is independent of the smart cards manufacturers. And we use the removable smart cards that you can put in your pocket in a safe place and so on. And you can also duplicate this. It means that, in fact, when there is no smart cards in the crypto terminal, there is no security pressure. There's no security issue on the crypto terminal. So the crypto terminal is not associated to smart cards. Countermeasure number 2 is smart cards clone detection. As do you know that you're using a greening smart card, counterfeit card may run a backdoor. This is called the evil-maid attack, this kind of stuff. So to avoid that, at the first instantiation of the software, the cryptocurrency software inside the Java card, generate a pair of public and private key. The private key is known by nobody, and the public key is certified, for example, typically by a certification authority such as Ethereum, but it can be another things. Certification authority certified by a company and country and so on. And so there is a certificate. And from the crypto terminal's point of view, you have either you press a touch in order to check the authenticity of the smart cards, or you send a command which is called check. So what do the crypto terminal to authenticate a Java card? First, he reads the public key, then he reads the certificate, then he checks the certificate with the public certification authority. And after that, he sends a command with a random, and this random value is signed with the Java card private key, which proves that this card is authentic. Countermeasure number 3 is smart cards content attestation. So how do you know that 2 smart cards have the same content? This can be the crypto terminals can duplicate smart cards, that's to say key, use cryptographic materials used by these smart cards for backup purposes, for example. And so there is a way to have the proof that the 2 smart cards have the same crypto content. To do that, there is a content command, or you press on the communication interface, or you press a dedicated keypad, and this command sends a random value to the smart card. The smart card generates the hash of the crypto value, and then he signs this hash concatenated to the random, and it returns the signatures and the value. There you see this value of hash, which is a kind of identifier of the crypto content by the card, and this identifier is certified by the smart cards. Countermeasure number 4 is a crypto terminal as an applicative firewalls. How do you know that a malware is not using the smart cards? This malware could run in the PC or mobile. So for that, as I said before, we use a crypto terminal as a firewalls between smart cards, which are cold device, and connected device such as a laptop or smartphones that are potentially corrupted. All critical operations are acknowledged by the user. And so that's why we say that the crypto terminal is a kind of firewalls, but for obvious reason, we need to be able to prove that the firmware of the terminal is authentic, because the firmware of the terminal is corrupted. What we say means nothing. So, countermeasure number 5 is the bare metal architectures. How do you know that your crypto terminal is running the right software? We have a discussion. We have an advisor in California, which has created several companies, and we have a strong discussion for some time about what can a user, how can user trust that his crypto terminal is using the right software. And the response to that was using bare metal architecture. That's to say, be able to reflash all the software. So we are able to flash the main processor firmware. There is no bootloader in the main processor. when from that you are able after that to reflash the Bluetooth module. Donc, we don't design the firmware of the Bluetooth module, but we are able to check that it's the correct firmware that has been flashed. And in the USB, in the programming token, we have a bootloader that is used to flash a firmware. And from that, we have also, we'll see later, we have a firmware that is able to check the correctness of the bootloader. So you see there's three processors that we reflash for this bare metal architectures. Number 7, firmware authentication code. This is really an important piece of security. How can you prove that the firmware is your firmware authenticity for the MIME processor, for the Bluetooth module, and for the programming token? For that, we use a remote attestation function that is called timestamped BMAC. And a remote attestation function is a sequence of instructions which compute a fingerprint hash over a set of memory, including the code of this function, remote attestation procedure, in a way that the MAC will be wrong or the computation will be slower if memory content are modified. It is very important that if you modify, put some malware in the firmware, that the computing time will be different. And we produce what is called an authentication, which is the result of the MAC XOR with the computing time. The performance, given the clock we use at 16 megahertz, the performance of this algorithm is about 1 millisecond per kilobyte. That means that for the MIME processor, it means that the computing time is about 3 minutes. There you see an example of that. So you see there's the seed, which is a kind of a code provided by the user, secret code, or this authentication code. So it's whatever you want. It's an integer number less than 2 billion. And then, after a given amount of time, what is produced is a result, is a MAC value. And you see there the MAC value, which is 32 bytes, part of it, and a computing time, which is expressed in 64 cycle units. That's to say 4 microseconds. So it means you given 2 crypto terminal, you always, and the same thing, you always get the same computing time and the same MAC code. And here is the authentication code, which is this number, and which is computed using part of the MAC and XOR with the computing time. So we use for that, which is the time-stamped bijective MAC. A BMAC compute a fingerprint of a set of memory, such as we compute the hash of memory over flash, SRAM, and square PROM, all the memory used by the system, including part of the data and all the code. And we use, but we compute this MAC according to a pseudo-random number, which is fixed by a permutation P, and given a memory space M, we have about M cubed / 4 permutation. And so at the end of this calculation, you have two things. You get a MAC computing in a pseudo-random order, and you get a computing time, and we XOR these two values. And this is the kind of permutation we use. This permutation are based on modular exponentiation. We are known as a permutation with a good degree of randomness. And then you see something very important. You see that the computing time, roughly speaking, has a normal distribution according to the permutation. It means each permutation has a pseudo-unique, is in a given class of computation time. Number 7 is static and dynamic puff. The question is how to detect hardware clone, and why would you want to detect hardware clone? It's possible that hardware clone means that another company design a crypto terminal, and it's not your crypto terminal. You don't trust this company. So it's a way to have the proof that your crypto terminal has the authentic component. How do you do that? We use something called SRAM Puff, or physical unclonable function. SRAM Puff is based on the fact that when you power up a static RAM, all the content of the cell are not random, but most of them take a fixed value, as one of 0, which is referred as SRAM Puff, and are referred it's a kind of static fingerprint, static ID. And we also use another effect, which is called a flipping bit. This effect is that depending on the power rising time, some puff bit can switch from one value to another. That's to say, always 0, switch to always 1, and always 1, switch to always 0. And we use that for the dynamic authentication. So how to collect SRAM Puff? We download a prod memory in the processors. Then we power up the device given no rising time. And after we collect the SRAM content, we do that a certain number of times. And there, this is an example of an ID card for a processor. You see that the green point are always seen to 1, yellow to 0. White means that there are no B bits, are not a stable content. And the red point are the flipping bits. So yeah, there you see the die associated to the main processor. And in this die, you have an SRAM. And so we collect part of this SRAM, which has use of ID card. And for the programming token, it's the same things. So this is an example of SRAM Puff reference for the programming the device. So to get this reference, you power up your device a number of times. So yes, there you see it's for 250 power up. So there you see the profile for device number 1 and number 2. And then you see in red the mismatch between the two profiles for the two devices. And you see that you have about 15% of mismatch, what shows that the content of memory are randomly different. And there's an illustration of dynamic puff. There it is an ID card of the main processor of the crypto terminal. So you see the bit 1 are in green, bit 0 are in yellow, flipping bit are in red, and the noisy bit are in white. There you see the flipping bit distribution depending on the threshold, and you see that the flipping bit occur at very low voltage. At this voltage, the processor is not working. So it means there is no digital way to design a clone. And then you see two kinds of what I call furtive waveform, powering up waveform. You see there this are slow signals, which means you have a slope, which is a slow slope. And when you reach about half volts, then you have this fast rising time. And this is what I reference as the fast furtive powering up signal, which is the RF signals. And you see that you have just a fast rising time. So what happens if you send this signal or this other signal? If you enter this signal, then you create no flipping bit. And if you power out by this signal, then you create a flipping bit. And there is no way for a processor to know if you use one signal or another. That's why, thanks to this technology, we are able to perform what we call SRAM Puff dynamic authentication. And finally, countermeasure number 8 is a programming token as a root of trust. How to prove that the programming token has the right bootloader? We have only bootloader in one devices. This bootloader is activated by a shortcut between the reset pin and ground. And so in the first time, the bootloader downloads an integrity probe, which is in fact a remote attestation algorithm based on, again, on the time-stamped BMAC. And the authentication is a display, which is a 5-digit authentication, is displayed by 2 blinking LED. And so this proves that the bootloader is correct. And when we have the proof that the bootloader is correct, from this bootloader, we download the programming firmware for USB ASP, which will be used in order to download, to flash the main processor. And I am done, and I'm ready for your question. Thank you for your attention.